In this short video, we're going to go over 4 topics. First, what is backtesting? Next, why backtest? Third, how to backtest correctly, and finally, how Backtest Broker can help you in the process. So what is backtesting? Backtests are simulated historical performance of a trading or investing strategy. And only certain strategies are able to be backtested. They have to be precisely defined in terms of rules and data, such that a computer or someone can blindly execute the rules without other knowledge or instruction. So for example, a buy on dip strategy, that alone is too vague to be able to test, versus something more specific, such as buy when stock hits its lowest level of the past month, is a backtestable strategy. So why backtest? Well, backtesting can find statistical patterns the naked eye misses. When you backtest, you focus on the statistics of many trades. What was the average trade's performance? What was the risk? What was the standard deviation? What was the best? What was the worst? A person doing trading live, they're not calculators. They're going to overemphasize recent trades. And even the most analytical investors are probably going to focus on the performance of an account with the starting and ending balance, as opposed to a strategy with defined starts and ends. Backtests are immune from human emotion. Psychology trumps economics in human beings. Psychologists have shown that losing $1 is more painful than the pleasure of gaining $1. That leads to bad decisions. It makes it difficult for people to take a loss, which leads to holding bad trades longer, with losses potentially snowballing. On the other side of the coin, it can be tempting to take small gains, preventing larger gains, effectively trimming the flowers and watering the weeds. Backtested strategies are perfectly repeatable, transparent, and measurable. If you, unlike fund managers or traders you could employ, they're a black box to a degree. You don't know what's going on in the process. You don't know exactly why they're making a trade or not. With the backtested strategy, you know at the exact same time, the exact rules, that's not an issue. As the boxer Mike Tyson famously quoted, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And with a backtested strategy, you can avoid that emotion and trade your plan perfectly every time. If you want to, get out in 1 month's time, no matter what, the backtested strategy will do that. And having that sort of solid evidence behind your strategy, it gives you conviction to hold on during times when a trade moves against you, which will shake out the weaker players. Backtesting also helps you manage your risk. Most traders cannot or do not know how to quantify your risk. As part of this backtesting process, risk is measured, which can allow you to diversify your portfolio's risk, develop uncorrelated strategies that go up when others go down, etc. And backtesting by its very nature is typically automated, which lets you go through decades of data in seconds. You can move at the speed of a computer, not the speed of a clock. You can develop a 10-year track record in seconds, not in 10 years. That's an advantage. Our scanner, for example, literally, we have servers running literally 24 hours a day, backtesting different different strategies, looking for that top 0.01%, and we present that list for you to analyze and review. Backtesting enables a scientific method. The analogy that comes to mind is 200 years ago, doctors did bloodletting because they thought it worked. They thought it helped people. And then people realized, let's be scientific about this. Let's do something, let's measure the results, and let's iterate and improve and that process. Sometimes it feels like in the trading investing process, there's techniques or methods or strategies that to me feel perhaps like bloodletting and not like science. Backtesting, for all the benefits, it's a powerful tool, but it's not a guarantee. Another analogy that comes to mind is a nail gun. A nail gun is a powerful tool, but it doesn't guarantee you're going to build a good house. Well, is a nail gun useless, therefore, if it can't build a good house? No, it is a helpful component, but you also need other components to build that good house. There's common pitfalls with backtesting, and we'll touch on some of the things you can do to avoid or minimize problems related to data mining or curve fitting, etc. So I mean, in general, people backtest because it gives you an edge. The way people compete in the markets is based on information. He or she who has more or better information is going to outcompete those who don't. So how is someone supposed to backtest correctly? Well, it's going to start with analyzing the data. A smart place to start is, first of all, looking for outliers. Let's say you have a backtest that shows great results, and then you dig in and you look at each individual trade or the return on those, and you see that in one case there was one day with enormous returns, and the rest of the days were averaging zero. Perhaps they had an earnings announcement and did well on that day. Is that a good strategy? No, that's a red flag to me. I don't want a stool with one leg. I want a stool, I want a strategy that works for a lot of reasons. And so one big day would be it would be a big red flag. Another one would be the number of trades or sample sizes. It's a lot easier to hit 5 free throws in a row than it is 50. And it's not about having a 100% free throw rate. It's about having a high free throw. It's more important to have a high free throw rate over a long period than it is perfect free throw rate. And also, you're going to want to look at how that strategy performs in a variety of market conditions. If a given stock just goes straight up, then any buy strategy is going to do pretty well. Versus a stock or a market that's going, that looks at periods of time where there's volatility, goes up and down. Does it also perform in that sort of environment? And that could depend on the type of strategy you're developing, whether you want to, strategy that performs well in any market or not. Beyond the data in the given back test, you're also going to want to bring in things that aren't in the data. You're going to want to couple theories and data. The thought, the analogy that comes to mind would be, a piece of data that said, 90% of the time when it rains, people outside have umbrellas open. So if someone said, okay, well, if I open my umbrella outside, what are the chances it rains? Well, that you can't answer that question with that data alone, because what's missing there is the relationship or theory between umbrellas and rain. Do umbrellas cause rain, or rain cause umbrellas? The data cannot answer that question, but logic and common sense can. Knowing that rain causes umbrellas to come out tells you that opening your umbrella will not cause rain. Does that mean that data that 90% of the time it rains, people have umbrellas out is useless? No, it has value, but its value comes when it's combined with other knowledge on how the world works. The exact same thing is true in the market and backtesting. Past patterns coupled with a solid theory are immensely more valuable, repeatable, predictable than just the data alone. That's a key point. And also, ultimately you don't really want a strategy that did well in the past. You want a strategy that's going to do well in the future. Well, you can test that. One way to test that is, once you've identified a strategy, is to start measuring it from that point forward. Everything that happens after that, there's no possible way the strategy can be peeking ahead, and it can't peek ahead. That's really the ultimate test. And does it perform in that sort of environment? If so, that's really what you want. And an even more sophisticated way of doing that is called audit sample testing, where rather than backtesting all the way until yesterday, you might backtest ending, some period of time ago, leave some of the data that you have, leaving your backtest ignorant to that data, essentially making that data in the future, and then saying, okay, here's my great strategy, through 2012. Now let's test that strategy in 2013, and did it also do well during that period of time? That's your key defense against backtesting or data mining or some other common pitfalls with backtesting. Backtest Broker can help you with your backtesting. We want to be your partner for your trading and investing and give you an edge in the markets. And really the two ways we're going to help you is first around identifying, analyzing, and deciding on a strategy. Strategies are probably going to come from one of two places. Either the current strategies you may already be trading, or theories you already have on market behavior, in which case you're going to enter those rules, or a close proxy of those rules into our web-based backtester. Alternatively, your strategy can come from our list of best performing strategies. We run backtests 24 hours a day, looking for the top 0.01% of strategies. You can take that list, click on it, and the rules on how to replicate that strategy are already specified. So once you have those rules entered into our backtester, you click go, then you're going to get the series of graphs and statistical results on that backtest results. You're going to analyze those results, think about some of the things we mentioned previously about looking for how to correctly backtest. You're probably going to want to tweak the parameters. After you've done all of your due diligence and homework on a strategy, you're going to want to save it to your account, which enables you to use it in the future. And which brings us to the second. After you've decided on the strategy, what you're going to want to do is measure and execute trades with that strategy. And the way our service helps you is, after you've saved it to your account, you can set up an alert that says, I want to know at 2:30 p.m. every day when my strategy is active, so you can measure the performance or execute trades. And that could be in the form of as simple as keeping a paper P&L, and every time you get that email, maybe writing it down, I'm going to execute a trade at this time at this price, and all of that information is also in the email we send you. Or after a period of time where you've gotten comfortable with the strategy, executing the trades live with your broker. And in the case of institutional customers too, we can automate the execution of your strategy. We can issue those buy and sell orders to your broker. We're happy to talk to you more about that if you have an interest. So hope that overview was very helpful, and we look forward to being your trading and investing partner. Thank you. Bye.